My name is Eileen McKusick, and I'm a researcher, a writer, a practitioner, and I've been studying the effects of audible sound on the human body since 1996. Basically, what I've been doing is waving tuning forks around people in the mountains of Vermont. And in the process of doing that, I've made some very interesting discoveries, which is what I'm here to share. So I wrote a book that came out last year. It's called Tuning the Human Biofield. And it details my research, my method, and this very interesting concept I've come across that I call the Biofield Anatomy. So, what is the human biofield and how do you tune it? So the human biofield is another word for aura, or human energy field. And I use the term biofield because in the process of seeking to understand the phenomenon that I was encountering as I was waving tuning forks around the body, I decided to pursue an academic route. And they don't use the phrase aura in academia. They do, however, use the term biofield. And this was actually coined by a panel of National Institute for Health scientists all the way back in 1994. So we had a really nice lead-in from Teresa because she was showing you these toroidal structures as well. And this is how I perceive the field to be about that size. Fields can certainly be of varying size depending on how you feel and where you are. But on average, what I find is that most people's fields are about 5 feet extending away from their body and 2 to 3 feet to the top and bottom. So in order to make sense, make scientific sense of how and why we have this structure around our body, I went off looking, and very briefly, what I found was when I first started using tuning forks, I introduced them into my massage therapy practice, and I used them right over the body. And when the very first time I activated a tuning fork and I approached someone with it, I thought that it was going to make an objective sound. It was going to sound the same wherever I put it. And much to my surprise, it changed in pitch and volume and timbre, depending on where I was placing it around the body. And what I discovered right off the bat was that these changes actually had significance. So if I held it over an area where someone had pain, it would sound sharp or full of static. If I held it over an area, like over somebody's heart, when they had fear or anxiety, it would develop a pulsing quality. And so over the course of 20 years, what emerged was that different emotions have different frequency signatures in our body. Okay? And as we experience feelings, those are movements in us that generate waves, and those waves propagate off our bodies. And so what happens is the tuning forks, the overtones and the undertones, the infrasonic and the ultrasonic and the audible range, interface with these waves coming off the body. Right? We've all had the experience of getting a bad vibe off of someone, right? Or you know how they read your brain waves? Those are on the outside of your skull, those sensors. It's because those brain waves, as they're generated, are actually propagating off of you. They expand away from you. And so a tuning fork will actually reveal the patterns of those waves. And so what I discovered was, over time, was that I kept finding the sounds that sounded sad in the left side of this area. I kept finding sad stories. I kept finding angry stories over here. I kept finding frustrated stories over here. And I also found another interesting phenomenon, so that not only did we appear to give off vibes in very specific places, but that it seemed that as we generated this information, it moved away from us. And so what also was revealed, in addition to this sort of compartmentalization or stratification of information being broadcast from us, was a kind of timeline aspect. So I found that I was finding information and stories that related to people's birth right at the outer edge of their field. I was finding stories that related to like halfway through their life, about halfway through their fields. And so in the process of this, and that I also found that there was a kind of resistance. Whenever there was a story that had trauma, it was almost as if I was coming up against a wall. There was an actual resistance there. And I discovered that I could break up and move that resistance. I could actually use the tuning fork kind of like a magnet and take this stuff, this resistance, and move it. And I discovered that it seemed to want to be in the body. So I developed this technique for finding these loud, sticky areas in the field and dragging them into the body where they would appear to be like sucked in to the body. And then people would tell me afterwards that they felt so much better. So in the process of doing this, what happened was this very effective therapeutic modality evolved. And I was helping people to resolve pain, resolve anxiety, resolve depression, like that, in really short order. And it was so powerful that I realized that I needed to bring it out into the world. But you know, when you tell people that you wave tuning forks around their body, there's a certain like knee-jerk response that a lot of people have to say, oh, that's really woo-woo, or that's really airy-fairy. And so I wanted to understand what was happening and put a scientific language to it. And in the course of trying to understand this, I came across a whole new cosmology. Okay? I discovered a theory called electric universe theory. Has anybody heard of electric universe theory? Okay, you're definitely, for those of you who haven't heard of it, you're definitely going to want to look it up because it is the cosmology of all is one. You know, our current cosmology says that gravity is the dominant force in space, okay? And that there's black holes that suck in light and mysterious dark energy and dark matter that are pushing things together, and that space is an empty vacuum of nothingness. Okay? It's a cosmology of darkness, of separation, of coldness, of random chaos. And it's depressing, right? I mean, who's here read a lot of self-help books, right? Because there's something about being born into this culture that is depressing. And so when I discovered electric universe theory, I discovered that the cosmology is the problem. So basically what electric universe theory says is that the universe is one big electromagnetic organism. And that space isn't an empty vacuum, it's filled with plasma. Okay? Who knows what plasma is? Not blood plasma, but the other plasma. Okay? Most people don't know what plasma is. I've got a whole long presentation online on YouTube where I explain all about electric universe and plasma and how it relates to this. But basically it says that the sun is a plasma, it's an electrically charged thing, and it has a north and south pole, and it has a plasma bubble that surrounds it that's bounded by what's called the heliosphere, right? And the Earth, the same thing, is an electrically charged organism, being, that has a north and south pole and is consequently surrounded by an atmosphere and a plasma bubble, okay? We, as human beings, are also electrical beings. We're very conditioned to think of ourselves in terms of chemical and mechanical. That's what we're trained. We don't realize that we're also electromagnetic. But our heart is an electrically driven oscillator. And our heart is what generates the field. If we go back, that is that, okay? So that you are an electromagnetic being. And so in electric universe theory, the heliosphere or the ionosphere of the sun is what's called a double layer plasma membrane. And it defines the outer boundary of the atmosphere of the sun, the atmosphere of the earth, the atmosphere of the human body, all right? And so what I have postulated is that as we generate this information, it gets stored in these standing waves. So all in here is all standing waves. And just like radio waves bounce off the ionosphere, right, and stay within the ionosphere, or the Schumann resonance, those of you that are familiar with the Schumann resonance, that's generated by all the electromagnetic activity, all the lightning and thunder, creates standing waves that exist within the ionosphere and inform all of life, right? Our brain waves, the Schumann resonance is in the range of 7.83 hertz. It's in that wonderful alpha theta range of pure beingness, right? All life on Earth has developed within this magnetic bubble and these standing waves. And so our life history is stored in this stratified and timelined way. When I learned about electric universe theory and I realized that everything was electromagnetic and everything was connected, I was like, here is the science of all is one, right? Because we can say all is one, but then we've got this cosmology of separation. And so when you learn that everything is electromagnetically connected and in this electromagnetic relationship, you suddenly go, oh my God, here is the science that describes it. The best self-help book I ever read, the self-help book to end all self-help books, was a book called The Electric Sky by Donald Scott that explains all of this. And it's sort of like a big sigh of relief to know that the cosmology is very different. So that's our human atmosphere. And one of the things that I found, and this is a sort of traditional rendering that shows the different densities of the bodies. When I first started discovering this pattern, this storage pattern that seemed to be here, and I was discovering that just like the brain is compartmentalized, right, and different things do different things, and I started discovering this whole structure, this anatomy and physiology within the field, I didn't believe it for a really long time, because the only thing that I'd ever seen is the different densities. I'd never seen or come across anything that said, all of the memories that you ever have that are sad live out here. I'd never come across that. And so it took years for this pattern to emerge and for me to start to find it. And I doubted it for a really long time because I couldn't believe that I was discovering something that no one had ever discovered. And so I had a lot of self-doubt for a long time. But the thing about this practice that I call Biofield Tuning that I've developed is that it produces such powerful and compelling outcomes that people can actually learn in a weekend class how to read and manipulate this information, go home and start changing people, getting rid of pain, getting rid of anxiety, all kinds of things just like that. Very, very simple. And because in my book I outline the whole Biofield anatomy map, you don't have to be intuitive. You can look at the map and say, okay, this is the area that relates to frustration. And using this sort of timeline concept, when you hit an area of resistance or distortion, you can identify the age. So you can read and manipulate people's fields super easy. And you can integrate it into other kinds of practices as well. That's just some of the things that I've treated. PTSD, head injuries, adrenal function. One of the things that's amazing about this, and we have an epidemic of adrenal fatigue and exhaustion in our culture, and you can treat it with supplements, but the underlying problem is the rhythm of the adrenals, that they're running too fast and too high, and once they've gotten kind of stuck in that rhythm, they stay in that rhythm. But with a tuning fork, you can find the edge of the adrenal field, which is about 3 feet off of the body. You can lock phase with its rhythm, and you can slowly move in towards the body and entrain that incoherent, too fast rhythm into a more coherent and biologically appropriate, or bring it back to its factory settings. And in 15 to 20 minutes, you can reset somebody's adrenal rhythm right back to where it needs to be. And then they don't need supplements anymore. Very, very simple, elegant solution. But what is particularly interesting to me in this conversation about consciousness, okay, is that does consciousness exist outside the body, right? This is this whole conversation that we're having about, is it just something that happens in the brain? Are we just these little meat machines? Or does consciousness really exist outside of us, okay? And what I have found with this work is that it absolutely does, and it's simple and obvious. In fact, I was encouraged by one of my mentors, perhaps 5 years ago, to try my work at a distance. People used to ask me, do you do this at a distance? And I would always say, of course I don't do it at a distance. Like, I use sound waves on the body. Like, there's no way I can do it at a distance. But then I was persuaded to do it. And at that time, this person lay on their bed in California, and I pretended he was on my treatment table in Vermont, where I'm from, and I approached the table as if he was there and discovered that the exact same patterns, these electromagnetic patterns that I've come to see almost as binary sequencing, it's all pure math at this point to me, appeared, and I was able to both read and manipulate his field at a distance. And so that's a really great example. These things show up, and I believe they can be measured. So my current project, after all of these years of being in clinic and deciphering this map, is I'm currently working on putting together a team to develop a technology that will actually take this changes in the audible signal and make it visible on a screen. So that way we will actually be able to see and read the consciousness that exists outside the body. And that will change the paradigm. So that's what this little segment's all about, right? About changing the paradigm. So, so resources for future information, because I have a number of talks online on YouTube if you're interested in electric universe theory and how it relates to this concept. I have a website, and I sell my own line of tuning forks. I sell instructional videos on how to do this work. Because my practice became so busy after my book came out, I couldn't manage the amount of inquiries that I was getting, and I decided to see if I could work on groups. And so I did a few experiments for free where I invited people to participate in group sessions, and the outcomes were tremendous. So a few times a week, I conduct group distance tuning fork healing sessions that are creating incredible outcomes for people. Very simple and very accessible. I also teach classes so that you can learn how to do this method as well. Okay, thank you very much. I'll be outside if anybody has any other questions.